This is the third video in the series of videos on social engineering attacks. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College. NCyTE Center and this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation. My name is Philip Kreger. I am a professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. Let's do a very brief review of some of the key points in the previous two videos. First, we defined social engineering as a manipulation technique that exploits human error, that is, behavior, to gain private information, access, or valuables. And when it comes to cyber social engineering, the incentive is for bad actors to target theft of personally identifying information, which can result in identity theft or other forms of fraud. And there's various types of attack vectors, that is, ways you can be attacked when it comes to the cyber realm. And these include through email, phishing, voicemail, also called vishing, or text messages called smishing. And recall that the point of, let's say, a phishing social engineering attack is to get you to click on something and provide information about yourself or about something. So how do these bad actors get you to act? How do they get you to click? Well, recall we discussed they use appeal to certain psychological principles such as greed, appeals to authority, fear, a sense of urgency, vanity, or sympathy. So essentially, bad actors try to invoke these senses and to engender some type of emotion to get you to do something, to click, rather than go on to the next email. And now the point of this last video is to show an overview of how to protect against social engineering attacks. Now, I could probably put together an 8-hour seminar on things that are relevant to social engineering, but these videos are meant to be awareness videos, so this is just really a very high-level overview. There are many other sources on the internet that you can go read in more depth about social engineering and how to protect against it. So the first thing that I learned a long time ago, when you start seeing all the different types of attacks that are coming at you in the cyber realm, is to be a little paranoid. There's absolutely no reason to overdo it, but also it's a good thing to be just a little bit paranoid. For example, the first thing when I see an email that engenders or incents some sort of emotion in me is to try to verify the sender. Is it the correct email address? Let's say if it's from a friend or family member, or if it's from a company with which you deal with. Is it the correct email address? Is the phone number correct? There's ways of verifying that. Does the message promote an emotion? Again, do you feel greedy? Is it something that you're going to get for free? Are you angry about the email? Does it make you curious, more curious than normal? Does something about the email engender a sense of fear in you? Or does it engender a sense of sympathy? So when you're viewing a text message, reading an email, or listening to a voicemail, think about, are the contents of this message trying to engender an emotion in me? And also realize that financial institutions, banking institutions, and healthcare institutions that hold sensitive information will never ask for personal information about you or your account over the internet or over the phone. That's pretty much guaranteed to be a social engineering attack. Now let's look at some specific examples that you can use to protect yourself. The first is never click on links in any emails or messages. And the reason is that most links look something like this, which just allows you to use your finger to click on it, to open up a browser, or to click on it with your mouse. But just because this says, notice, google.com, doesn't necessarily mean that the underlying link actually goes to google.com. And this is just a silly little example, and you'll see right here, I'm hovering over this, and this is actually going to google.ru. Yes, it's a silly example, but it illustrates the point that just because this has what appears to be a legitimate link doesn't necessarily mean it's the actual link. Another thing you can do is use multi-factor authentication. What is authentication? Well, we've covered that in some of the other videos, but authentication is you providing information to an online system to indicate you are who you say you are. So it's really a two-step process. The first thing is identification. That is usually your username, your email address, or a series of characters. And then, of course, there's the actual verification of who you are, and that's with your password. And so normally, one-factor authentication is your username and password. However, multi-factor authentication now uses a secondary form to verify who you are. Because if somebody steals your username and password, they can authenticate to a system. However, if you used a secondary form of authentication, for example, a phone that's set up to use with the system, when you log in, you'll receive a text message to your phone with a series of characters that then use to go back and verify that you are actually who you are. So it's just adding a layer of protection to your online identity. Now, here's another biggie that I think a lot of people violate, and that is to never reuse your password for multiple sites. If you have 10 websites or 10 accounts online, you should have a minimum of 10 passwords, different passwords for each site. Every semester for the last few years, I ask my students how many passwords they use for their online accounts, and they say, well, usually 4 to 5. I can tell you why that's a bad idea. Because if your credentials, that is your username and password, are stolen from one site, and you've used that username and password or just the password on another site, then the bad actor can use that to gain access to that other site. Now you think, come on, that doesn't happen very often. How often are credentials stolen from websites? Well, let's take a look. So there's this site called I Have Been Pawned. And you can put in your email or phone number right in here and click Pawned, and it will tell you whether that credential, whether your email or phone number is in a database somewhere that has been identified on the internet. And if we look down here at the bottom, let me blow this up a little bit, but it shows you how many websites and accounts have been stolen. 11 billion pawned accounts, that is stolen accounts. And then it goes into the largest breaches in here. We notice Facebook had about 500 million stolen. Over here, Moby and Friends. So, and these over here on the right are the recently added breaches, but every day somewhere on the internet, accounts, credentials are stolen. And then a lot of times they're pasted somewhere on the dark web, which we've discussed in another video. Now realize you and I don't have any control once we create an account online. And in fact, I use several email addresses for different things, and one of my accounts has been breached 8 different times. So one of my emails, one of my Gmail accounts is showing up in 8 different breaches. But how do I protect myself, or how do I minimize the damage from that? And the answer is to use a password manager. And there's a lot of different password managers. I happen to use something called LastPass, LASTPASS. And so essentially it is a database that stores my passwords. And one of the great things about LastPass is that I can use LastPass to generate a random series of characters to use for a password. And this is what we're showing on the screen right here. Notice that I've said that I want a password. I want it to be 12 characters in length. I want it to include uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. And then I click Fill Password, and essentially that will be used as the password for a particular account. Now, when I go back to that online source, LastPass will offer to fill in this password for me. And as it turns out, I have about 350 online accounts. I'm a lot older than you, so I'm going to have a lot more accounts. But if I have 350 accounts online, I've got 350 passwords. Now, the only issue is that I have to remember one password for my LastPass. And by the way, that password is very long and complicated, but it's something that I can remember. And so this is a great way to make sure that even if your account credentials are stolen on one website, that it doesn't affect any of the other websites on which you have accounts. Here's another thing that annoys me about social media. You should avoid sharing names of your schools, pets, place of birth, or other personal details. And I see this happening all the time. I do very little social media. I do Facebook so I can keep track of my friends and my family. But what I see people doing is them talking about personal things, or talking about their pets or the high school they went to. A lot of people that I've seen will use this personal information as part of their passwords. Well, why do they do that? Because it's really easy to remember. And here's something now that I'm seeing being posted, and these, I'm not sure where these companies are coming from or why they're doing this, but you see these memes asking you to name the street you grew up on. And then I go in and I see all these people are actually giving the name of the street they grew up on. Well, why should you not do that? Of what importance is that? Well, you know why? Because most of you should know that let's say you forget your password. In order to recover your password, some online websites will have security questions that you fill out when you are creating new accounts. So they may allow you to choose what type of security questions to use so that when you do lose your password, they will ask you to answer the security question that you've selected. And here's an example right here. What is the first name of your best friend in high school? The name of your first pet? What was the first thing you learned to cook? I see more and more these types of questions showing up on social media. Now, we've already talked about identity theft, but let's talk about protections against identity theft and identity fraud. And so in an earlier video, we talked about how if somebody was able to gather enough personally identifying information about you, is they could get a loan in your name, or they could perhaps get your income tax refund or perform other forms of fraud. So how would you go about protecting yourself, let's say in this example, against somebody getting a loan in your name? Identity theft is not the same thing as credit card theft and credit card fraud. If somebody gets your credit card number, normally you're only legally liable for the first $50 of credit of the theft. And in fact, I've had my credit card number stolen probably half a dozen times over the last 20 years, and I've never been liable for anything that's on there. Also, credit card companies are much better about protecting against this type of fraud. Now, identity theft is something totally different and much worse in terms of the consequences. So here we're not talking about credit card theft, but identity theft. There are horror stories out on the internet. Search for identity theft horror stories and you'll see how it could take months or years to clear up identity theft. But let's see how you can protect against. Let's say you want to get a loan for a car. The first thing the credit lender does is to contact one of the three major credit bureaus, either TransUnion, Equifax, or Experian, to see what your credit rating is. If your credit rating is sufficient, you can get a loan. So the best way to protect against identity theft is to do something called freezing your credit. You would go to the TransUnion site, freeze your credit, the Equifax site, and the Experian site. So what does this mean, freeze your credit? So even if someone has every bit of your personal identifying information, your credit score cannot be accessed. Again, that's used for loans, new credit, or even jobs. I don't know if you knew that. If you want to select an employee as reliable, look at their credit score, because the higher their credit score, the more likely they're going to be a responsible person, or at least that's the way employers look at it. If a bad actor steals your personal identifying information, they submit the application, nothing can be done because when the lender goes to look at your credit score, it's been frozen. The bad actor can't get the loan. Now, let's say that you have frozen your credit at all three major credit bureaus, and now you want to get a loan for your car. Well, you go on to one of the websites, depending upon which credit bureau the lender uses, and you can thaw your credit for a set period of time. Allows the lender to look at your credit score, look at your credit, and then give you the loan, hopefully. Now, the first thing you're probably asking yourself is, that's going to affect my current credit card, or it's going to affect my credit score. Absolutely not. Freezing does not affect your current credit or your current loans or your credit score. There's absolutely no reason for you not to do this. So this ends the series of videos. We've talked all about social engineering attacks. We talked about what it is. We talked about the attack vectors. We discussed how to identify social engineering attacks and how to protect yourself as best you can against social engineering attacks. And the bottom line of this series of videos is to realize everybody is under attack every day. There will always be bad actors attempting to gain access to your information and profit from it. And the reason is because it works. People are falling for it. And so the best thing you can do is to educate yourself, educate your friends, educate your family, and also be vigilant. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College.